Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Lucy. This is Hardwired for Life, and this is John Rhyner.
Hello.
He's a friend of mine. Today, John is going to bless us with his salvation experience and how God worked in his life. So we've had a lot of conversations, and I'd really like to start out with him presenting what he thought was most important first, so that we can be blessed. So I think the first question was, what's your earliest remembrance of growing up and how God was in your life?
Well, I was raised with my mom, who was Catholic, a little girl, and she would take us to church at Mass, and that was kind of my first experience of spirituality. And the times of being there, I remember that we sang songs, and it was during those songs that I felt God's presence a lot.
Mm-hmm. Right. So did you have a remembrance early on about like your own kind of like reaching towards God by yourself?
I do remember that I did ask my mom for a Bible when I was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then my uncle and aunt gave me a Bible, my very first Bible, for my 9th birthday.
Oh, that's cool. So, okay, you had also told me that something kind of strange happened before that, right before that happened.
Well, I had a former step-grandmother, step-grandmother at the time, who had taken me to a healer.
Okay.
And, well, supposedly he was a Christian, but when I got there, I realized the gentleman was in the occult.
Okay.
And shortly after, he prayed over me in the darkness and said some weird language that I didn't know what was. It wasn't English.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that happened, probably within a few months, I started seeing colors in my sleep, half asleep or sleep, and feeling some weirdness on my forehead.
Okay. So, as a child, you probably thought that was normal.
I didn't even...
Or didn't really even register?
It didn't register.
Okay.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was normal or not. I just knew that's what was going on.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your family. How many brothers, sisters?
I grew up with 3 brothers, no sisters.
Oh, okay.
Older brother, and I have younger brothers that are twins.
Okay. So you also grew up where?
Whittier, then Chino. Whittier during most of my young elementary years. Chino up until the end of 5th grade, and then Hemet, San Jacinto for about 2.5 years, and then the rest of the time through high school in Hemet.
Mm-hmm. And from what I remember too, you actually wound up without a dad.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. My dad was out of the picture most of our lives.
So you didn't really have that father image there either.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Okay, so you also were telling me that you had some other weird stuff going on until you were about what, preteen? Experiences that were kind of traumatic.
Yes, I was susceptible to some pornography at a young age, and some experiences that shouldn't have happened shouldn't have happened to a child at a young age.
Okay, so your young impression was not really a good one.
Not really.
In that way.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So you also had told me that you had a young experience with accepting the Lord. Can you tell me how that went?
Well, first of all, the desire to know God was really strong in me. Like I said, 7, 8 years old, I just knew I just wanted to know Him, and it was when we moved to San Jacinto, and I was beginning my 6th grade in school, that we started attending a church in the area. And it was at a summer camp that all 4 of us, me and my brothers, went to, and we all gave our hearts to Christ on the same night.
Okay. So how did you feel? Like, how did that play? How did that affect you? I guess.
I was I was glad I did it. I just didn't necessarily feel him strong, but I just knew there was something real that night, definitely. And as I was going to church and youth groups and Sunday services, and at that time, the church we were at was a very small church, so all the teenagers, even preteens, would just sit in the service with all the adults. And so I would just listen in and just absorb.
Yeah. So how did you, like in those younger years, were there any other things that you can remember where the Lord was present in your life, or you realized it was God, since you were saved at such a young age?
I really had a hard time with that emotionally.
Okay.
Because of my upbringing, there was a lot of heaviness and shame and guilt that I was struggling with, and self-hatred since I was really young, probably as young as 3 or 4. Seriously.
Do you know why? I mean, could you equate that then, or do you want to talk about how that is now looking back?
I learned that now, like within the last 20, 25 years looking back. And part of it was the upbringing without a dad, and my desire to want my dad in my life. And that also, I believe, helped me increase my desire for God, wanting to know Him, because and I was struggling with that just because I didn't have a dad and I didn't know what was normal.
Right. And so your mom divorced him.
Yes.
And then you had traumatic experiences with her second husband?
Yeah. Well, this is actually her third husband, but
okay.
My dad was number 2, and she was married with him about the third husband about 3 or 4 years. He had 3 of his own children, so there were 7 of us in the house. And what I learned years later was that their mom had trouble with drugs, and that's why her third husband left his first wife. My mom, I believe, was his second wife.
Okay, but it just made it difficult not being your real father, and
right, and not on purpose, but I think that their grandmother was jealous or envious or wanting only to spend time with their grandchildren sometimes alone and leave me and my brothers at the house.
So there was some favoritism there.
There was that's right.
Yeah.
Favoritism.
So you guys, did you feel it then? You were very aware at that age?
Yeah, it's weird.
Okay.
I remember one specific time where she took the 3 of them and all 4 of us did, and I felt the rejection.
Sure. So
he himself, the grandpa though, he was a very tender man. I do remember that. The times he'd taken us to parks and given us fig Newtons, and very loving. So I think it was more probably his wife, my former step-grandmother, that was that way more so. The jealousy and the envy and whatever other reasons she had.
Right. Yeah, you just weren't the same family.
True. We weren't blood. So even though I was having trouble with being succumbed to this this fellow student from school, I was still pressing into God. I was starting to go to youth groups more often. And in fact, we went to Amy Grant concert way back in '85, Unguarded. And that was my very first experience to Christian music. And I loved the music so much that I bought the cassette a week later. And it was then that I started really understanding how awesome Christian music was. And then a few months later, on my birthday, I ran into a PE teacher I saw at a restaurant. And when I told her it was my birthday, she ran to her car and gave me a cassette of Michael W. Smith, The Big Picture cassette.
Nice.
And so more and more I started learning about different Christian artists, Keith Green and such and such. And I really was drawn to that. It really did some changes emotionally and spiritually in my life.
So you could tell the presence of God was changing your life, even though you experienced a lot of darkness.
Yeah, the shame was very strong still, but I started I just didn't understand that it was the Spirit of God moving on me, but I just felt His presence through that music.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just drawn to it. I didn't even want to listen to secular music as often.
Yeah. So how did the rest of high school go and into your young adulthood then?
Well, during high school, they were older men that I met at my work, and that came on to me, and I ended up doing things with them. One's a doctor. One was even a pastor at a different church.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience was weird because I just did one thing with this pastor, and when I went there, there were boys my age, probably even 2 or 3 years younger, or up to 2 or 3 years older, when I was 16. And that is a memory that I will never forget. And all the other boys slept in the other rooms, and it was just me and him in his bedroom that one night.
So did you feel betrayed?
I felt, well, wait a minute, if he's, because I mean, he's supposed to be a pastor, but yet, and I was just an emotional wreck, so I was just kind of succumbed to that. I didn't understand what a predator was all about, you know. I didn't get that then. But that's pretty much, I believe, what he did to me.
Right. So after high school, then kind of what happened after that in your personal life, and as far as like, were you planning to go to college? What did you wind up pursuing?
Right. About 8 months after I graduated high school, I tried a half a semester, a semester over at Mount San Antonio, nearby college there, and I just wasn't, I couldn't focus. I had a hard time understanding what's going on with me. I ended up dropping the classes and not finishing.
Okay.
So 8 months after graduating high school, though, that's when I moved to the Rancho Cucamonga area.
Okay, so then you continued on working and still being seduced.
Right. A couple of months after I moved to Cucamonga, I got a job, and a retail store, and I met customers off and on. I would end up having experiences with.
So where was the point in your life then? How long did this go on, like, for you to come to grips with you needed to stop?
I didn't like it at all from the very first time that I had the first sexual experience. I knew it was not of God. I just didn't know how not to get out of it. I was afraid that I was kind of stuck. Okay. But in the meantime, Mom and my family, we started going to a church nearby in Ontario, and I kept pressing into God and really wanting to be free, but and there's times that the shame would hit so hard where I would run from it, but in other times I was just succumb to it.
Okay. So where did you finally get to a place of freedom?
When I really started understanding that was probably not until my late 20s. Okay. To really understand there is even a possibility that I could actually be free from this area.
Okay, so how much longer did it take for you to actually come out of being seduced by predators?
Probably another 7 to 10 years before I was able to really, really grow and understand God's love for me.
And what were you doing during that time with the Lord? How were you and Him?
Well, I did have an experience back when I was 13, and I was on my bed and I was praying, but I raised my hands to God, and I felt tingling all over my arms. And I jumped up my bed. I just ran out in the living room. My aunt was sharing with my mom. I think she was even witnessing to my mom. And my mom had this bewildered look on her face, and my aunt had a smile on her face, like she knew what was going on. My mom didn't know what was going on, but I knew that this experience was very real, and I really believe it was God.
So did that carry you through?
Well, I started reading scriptures a lot. I mean, I was reading I mean,
Mm-hmm.
starting to learn to run every day.
Mm-hmm.
I still had trouble TV addictions in my teens and my 20s, but I was getting into the Word of God a lot more.
Okay, so when did you come to a point of knowing you had to stop
Well,
having relations with other men?
well, there was a point when I was getting back from my brother's wedding reception.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't even get a chance to make it to the wedding. It was like a shotgun wedding in Las Vegas. But when I came home that night, and I was 24 at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I just cried on my bed and said I could never see myself ever getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And then God spoke to me and said, read Colossians 3. And so I read Colossians 3, and it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And it just spoke to me volumes of God's love for me. And it also talked about holiness
Mm-hmm.
and holy living.
Right.
And what I end up doing, I just had this drive that I needed to memorize this passage.
Mm-hmm.
So I memorized chapter 3, verses
Mm-hmm.
1 through 17, and I personalized it. Where it says we or our or theirs, I put me, mine, or
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
Right.
I, me, or mine.
Right.
And I made it a daily prayer,
Mm-hmm.
not in a legalistic way,
Mm-hmm.
but in a seeking, wanting, really change,
Right.
and really crying out for God for His truth in me,
Right.
His love in me, and me to break this sin that was just making me feel like I was a destroyed, defeated person.
Mm-hmm. So you still had a desire for women. So you said that first. So that was never your intention to be stuck in that lifestyle. But where did you finally make the break, if you will?
What I truly, truly believe the true break happened when I was about 41. 41 years old,
Mm-hmm.
where that was about 10 years ago. And I just finally started understanding that God loved me as a daddy did to his son.
Okay.
It took me 30 years to get that way.
Okay. And
then when I did,
mm-hmm.
it was amazing, because then I the fears broke on running to him. I was not wanting to run away. It's like all the other years prior, and run and escape into sexual sin or shame or TV addiction or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I started understanding how to run to
Right.
him, and it just, I mean, I was just like, wow.
Yeah, you
It
don't,
was
you
like
don't have to do that.
It was
other
like a
stuff,
huge revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when the drive to seek him was growing.
Mm-hmm.
The desire to be away sexually was lessening.
Mm-hmm.
And I was starting to understand my identity in Jesus.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a question too. I believe we talked about the identity is huge here.
Yes.
So you had a lot of rejection going on in your life for many reasons.
Yes.
And then you had a conversation with your mom about your birth.
Yes. Yes, Mom just barely told me some deep things. I knew some stuff about 10 to 15 years ago that she did try to miscarry me 2 or 3 different times, like purposely going on amusement park rides knowing that she was pregnant, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
She started realizing the kind of man my dad was, and then that's when she realized she didn't probably want me.
Okay.
So I started understanding that. And then years later, which was just about 3 or 4 years ago, Mom told me that she did try to abort me. And that was a very hard thing for her to share.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad she shared it. But it wasn't until a year ago that she told me that how she was trying to do it. And she did go to an abortionist. Mm-hmm. But the abortionist was jailed before he had a chance to abort me.
Okay. So that's powerful. That's very powerful. God loves you. He has a reason for you to be here. And despite her fears and other rejection issues and all the trauma and all the abuse, you're still here.
That's true. true.
And we're so happy you're here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the trauma also was that I could look back as young as 5 or 6 years old and know there was some kind of connection with mom that was not healthy.
Okay.
And I then really got it in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a
So you had to work through all that too.
Right. And even learn to say no to my mom with my credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand she didn't do it purposely, but she was in survival mode, if you will. And when I verbally told her I was actually at a little Bible missionary school, and over the phone said, Mom, God told me not to give you my credit card anymore, not to allow you to use them.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me about another couple of years before I was able to, shut the credit cards off, and then the rest of there.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I'm very proud of her is that without asking me, it took her 12 years, but she paid off those credit cards and cleared my credit.
So you learned about boundaries and things like that you didn't have.
Slowly.
Right.
But that was one of the first beginning stages of boundaries with mom.
Yeah. So where do you think you are today with your relationship with God and everything that you've been through?
Well, like I said, once I started really understanding how much he loved me, not just as a God way up in the sky, but as my heavenly daddy, Abba Father, if you will, just really understanding his love for me really helped me understand that, number one, I had to sever from friendships that, even though there were quite a few of them were Christian friends, we all had different sheltered lives, and I had to start changing my friendships. I had to start pursuing healthier Christians, and even some of them, I kept some of their friendships, but I had to cut it down, way down to acquaintance levels. And when I started doing that, that's when I started understanding boundaries in a stronger way.
So,
and of course, there was a book that was presented to me. Okay, and this book really taught me how to understand about boundaries in a deep, deep way.
So what would you like to tell the audience today?
Well, should I look at the camera?
Yeah.
Well, I really believe that no matter how deep a wound things are in your life, God really understands every single part of us. All the emotional pain, all the physical pains that some of us even face, all the psychological pain. He really, truly does love us. And he gets every single painful memory that we've had, all the times we've cried, all the times we screamed and yelled, "Where are you, God?" He heard every one of those cries of my own. And he showed me later in the future how real those cries were and how he was there for me the whole time.